Welcome back to RADTV. I'm Henshall. Well, earlier we had Kam Sandhu here telling us about the Real Media, the very exciting Real Media initiative, which has just held a conference in Manchester. We talked about the general problems of the media, and now we're going to talk about some of the more specific problems and possibly what Real Media might be hoping to do about it. So Kam, one of the problems with mainstream media is that they sort of select the issues, don't they? And some things they don't want to look at and some they do. They don't necessarily tell lies, but they're highly selective.
Yeah, and that has a huge impact on people's understanding of society. Luckily, that's opened up a lot more with the advent of the internet and people's ability to kind of fill in those gaps. But yeah, a lot of the selectiveness is down to either the proprietors who own them, who have largely business interests, self-interest kind of narratives, divide and rule tactics, and then you've also got advertisers, which we know Peter Oborne publicly resigned from the Telegraph recently over the fraud on the readers because of their non-coverage of HSBC. While you say that it's not lying, essentially it's incredibly
sort of lying by is it lying by implication, isn't it? Because there's an assumption that they're telling you the most important things, whereas actually they're not. That's
And the way that they're presented, so kind of the way that the scrounger and skiver rhetoric has gone through the sanctioning regime, which means that people are kind of suspicious of welfare claimants. These are people who don't have very much money, and their lives are becoming far more difficult through a hideous bureaucratic system that's degrading and humiliating, while at the same time huge amounts of fraud are kind of happening up here with people like HSBC, and it's kind of shrouded in this nice language, this financial jargon that doesn't really give away what this kind of criminality that's really taking place. So HSBC had it, as well as allowing tax evasion and avoidance, it was also funding terrorist groups. It was also allowing money laundering for Mexican drug cartels, and that was an involvement in a violent system that people were being killed for, and they were allowing that system to continue. So really understanding the impacts of what they've done is being shrouded. So
and you've got Barclays and the LIBOR rate.
Of course.
I mean, if that had been Al Qaeda had rigged that, or we'd hear about it. Special supplements. There'd be multi-page sort of investigations. Yeah. But and then Barclays is in some ways, some people think is more culpable than HSBC because HSBC is Chinese. We should mention Media Lens, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
They're an excellent website, medialens.org, I think.
Yeah, they're brilliant.
Are they involved with the Real Media initiative?
They have given their support to us, and they've definitely been a big inspiration in terms of what kind of media that could be achieved, and in being really upfront about the issues with the media. Certainly they speak a lot about advertising and stuff to do with climate change. I think one of the Davids is an environmentalist because it's run by two guys called David Edwards and David Cromwell. And it's not just the advertising, because we know that plays such a big part. I mean, they talk about the fact that people like BP, they issue directives saying that if there's negative coverage in newspapers about the oil industry and so on, that they'll pull their advertising, and that's worth a lot of money to people. But as well as that, it's this kind of passiveness that we have to it. So I think they spoke about the Independent being one of the greenest papers, but and that one of their issues had this is the end, we need to change something, and then you flick through the paper and there's Ford adverts and Shell adverts, and it's kind of makes you quite passive so you're like, oh, there's an emergency, but I'll still go get a car. So it's not really displaying the urgency of what needs to happen, and that's because of the reliance on their money. Yeah,
and then there's divide and rule, isn't there? We on the left sometimes wonder if there's agitators, because some people just seem to always hate other groups. There's always somebody in a group that seems to hate all the other groups, but anyway, on the media level it's different, it's a national level thing, but it's still an issue, isn't it?
It's hugely an issue. I mean, I think just this week I saw somebody post an article from The Express, and once again they've done that kind of coverage of asylum seekers where they have a group of black men walking around in a group, and then a big fancy hotel, like, oh, they're coming in and staying in beautiful places. And at the same time, we've got Yarlswood Detention Centre, the reports coming out of undercover reports about sexual abuse, about women throwing themselves downstairs to try and commit suicide because their lives are made so hellish, racist, violent guards, Serco guards, outsourced through a system of privatisation. These people are going through hell, and they're some of the most vulnerable people, and and it's still being stoked up that they deserve some sort of vilification by our media.
Yeah, and then you've got the distractions, the sort of prince, whoever it is, with his wife. I try to keep out of it all, but people start thinking you're a bit of a freak if you don't know who all these people are. Yeah.
Definitely. I think one of my friends tried to work out when Kate was due her next baby, and was like, I'm sure it's due around the next election, kind of worried about it. But yeah, I mean, we saw it with the previous birth. Some journalists standing outside the hospital and giving us hour by hour updates of what was going on, and I'm sure I've seen a couple of journalists kind of losing it about doing that sort of coverage. But through kind of distraction, I mean, this happens also with stuff like immigration, when immigration has been a thing that has been churned out during election time. This is the debate. This is the thing that should control the election. And the right-wing media have been very, very good at with their kind of short headlines. So immigration has come to be blamed for housing problems, for the NHS and so on, when in fact it's a really, really useful distraction, because instead of blaming the people who are really making those policies, we're blaming people who more than likely come here to try and make a living.
Certainly. There are other distractions. There's crime in general.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes it's just like the news is just like one long police report.
It is, yeah. I mean, I think one of my friends looked at the UKIP website and the Green Party website, and he says if you look at the UKIP website, and their policies are all things that are built on sort of fear. So it was like crime, policing, immigration. And you look at, for example, the Green Party, and they're talking about climate change and so on. And it's because it's kind of so useful, that fear, it's really useful to numb people into worrying, into being distracted, into being fearful of something that's kind of abstract. When in fact crime has been falling for a number of years.
Yeah, totally. So, and then if you're not worried by crime, then you've got the possibility that Al-Qaeda is going to drop an anthrax letter through your doorstep or something. And I read it recently on the internet, I hope this is right, but apparently Jacques Hollande's rating went up from 5% popularity to something like 50% as a result of the Charlie Hebdo incident in Islamophobia.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's the worst one, really, Islamophobia. I don't know.
Yeah, it's certainly...
It's the enemy within. I remember when Margaret Thatcher said, the miners were the enemy within. There was an outcry, actually. To be fair to the media, everybody said that's an outrageous way to talk about anybody in Britain as an enemy within. And now it's just commonplace that Muslims are the enemy. They didn't quite use that phrase, but it's very clear how they're seen, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think Owen Jones quoted one study in 2007 where they took newspapers coverage over a week, and they said something like 80 to 90% of the time when Muslims were mentioned, they were mentioned in a negative capacity linked to terrorism. And when you constantly have that driven into people, you've got to kind of wonder what they're going to start to think. Of course they're going to start to feel fearful. Of course there's going to be a lack of understanding about the way that's presented. And at the same time, I read an article by one Muslim who said there are two places in the world or in the universe where no one can hear you scream, and that's one's in space, and the other one's if you're a Muslim condemning ISIS anywhere else, because people want to kind of pump out fear, and they don't want to kind of hear that people are like, that Muslims are actually saying this is ridiculous. Of course, that's boring apparently. So yeah.
But I think it would help, although obviously I'm not really for me to give them advice, but I think if some of the official Muslim bodies were a little bit more outspoken, maybe they are, but the media don't report it.
I definitely believe they are. Yeah. I mean, and there's also a kind of, a double standard that's happening. Fear, as we've spoken about, is really a currency of newspapers. So they churn out this kind of Islamophobia because that sells. They believe it sells papers and it keeps people distracted. They don't want to hear something that's going to disturb that. I definitely think there's lots of evidence that lots of Muslims have been speaking out, but yeah, they've definitely been blocked out by the media, unfortunately. And yeah, I think lots of people say when is it Anders Breivik when he committed his atrocities, no one asked for every white Christian person to come out and speak against it. No one thought that all white people were that way inclined, and yet, you know, we've got this weird kind of like, you must come out and say, apologise for these crimes that, you know, clearly isn't current in a faith where 1.8 billion people on the earth, you know, believe in it. If they all believe that, trust me, I think a lot of us would be gone by now.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think time's running out on us. Thanks very much for coming, Kam.
No problem.
I'm sure we'll have you again sometime. The Real Media, you know, we must watch this space. Real Media, we'll find them. How do we find Real Media on Google?
Look out for us at www.realmedia.press. We'll be launching fully in April.
realmedia.press from April 2015. Fantastic. Thanks very much, Kam.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching.